Hello everyone and welcome to Bhasi's IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's news, that is 16th November 2019. Our first article of discussion is regarding National Education Document. Treating education as a public good. The recent National Education Policy document, despite its lacunae, is a vast improvement over its earlier avatar. Let's get into this news and analyze what's been said. So, in this discussion, we'll try to understand why this is in news, what is the history of national education policy in India, what is the new education policy says, what's the current changes that brought in the new document, what are the areas of improvement and what's the way forward. First, we'll try to understand why this is in news. This is in news because the near final NEP or National Education Policy, despite its lacunae, is a vast improvement over its earlier almost unreadable avatar. That is, the 55-page report was published. It is matched by a reader-friendly organization structure. It consists of 4 chapters. First one is school education, second one higher education, then other key areas like adult education, technology, promotion of arts and culture, and a section on making it happen by establishing an apex body and the financial aspects to make quality education affordable for all. Now we'll try to understand what is public good factor in this education policy, or why are we saying that we have to treat education as a public good. Education for most of us is a necessary public good central to the task of nation building, and like fresh air is necessary to make our communities come alive. Yes, it should not be driven solely by market demand for certain skills or be distracted by the admittedly disruptive impact, for instance, intelligence and communication, etc. So this form of education should be unshackled from the chains of deprivation and affordable education. So education is a public good. We mean to say that it should be out of deprivation and it should be affordable. A good example for treating education as a public good is JNU. In Jawaharlal Nehru University, which is situated in Delhi, is vital to ensure access to even the most marginalized sections. Therefore, education policy in essence must aim to produce sensitive, creative and upright citizens who are willing to take the less travelled path and whose professional skills will ensure and endure revolutions in thinking and technology. So this is why we summarize by saying that we have to treat education as a public good. Next, we'll try to understand what is the history of education policy in India. So, the evolution of national education policy of India is in this trajectory. First one was during 1968. Indira Gandhi government announced first national education policy on education in the year 1968, based upon the recommendations of the Education Commission, which was set up in between 1964 and 1966. So we'll see what are the things which was introduced during the first national education policy in the year 1968. Before getting into that, we'll have a brief history about what has happened in 1950. Then we'll get into 1968. So first national education policy has come on 1968. But in 1950, what has happened is that Article 45 of the Indian Constitution mandates as follows: the state shall endeavour to provide within a period of 10 years from the commencement of this constitution for free and compulsory education for all children until they complete the age of 14 years. So this was told in Article 45, which is our directive principles of state policy. So, based upon this 1968 first national education policy was formed. The government resolves to promote the development of education in accordance with strenuous efforts should be made for the early fulfillment of directive principles under Article 45 of the Constitution. So, as we have discussed just now, Article 45 under DPSP have enforced the Constitution for free and compulsory education of all children until they complete the age of 14 years within 10 years from the commencement of 50. That means 1960 was the deadline. 68 this rule has come. that Article 45 of the Constitution seeking to provide free and compulsory education for all children up to the age of 14. This was introduced in the first national education policy. Now let's understand what happened next. After 1968 period, then we went to 1986. Second national education policy was released. Rajiv Gandhi government was there during that time, launches new education policy, that is second education policy, focusing on adult education and empowerment of minorities. So main focus was adult education, empowerment of minorities. So when we are looking here in 1986, second national education policy came. It shall be ensured that free and compulsory education of satisfactory quality is provided to all children up to the age of 14 years of age before they enter 21st century. So before the country enters into 21st century, we have to give free and quality education to all children up to the age of 14 years. Okay, this was introduced during the second national education policy. As we have discussed here, it goes against with adult education and empowerment of minorities was the main focus in the second national education policy. Now we'll try to understand what was the third national education policy. It was in the year 1992. In 1992, modifications of 86, second was done, national education policy under P.V. Narasimha Rao government, adding a common entrance examination for professional and technical programs. So this was introduced. Common entrance examination was introduced in third national education policy. That was in the year 1992. So first was in 1968, second was in 1986, third was in 1992. These are the first, second and third national education policies. So in detail, if you are seeing third national education policy which was introduced in the year 1992, the new thrust in elementary education will be emphasized on three aspects. First one is that universal access and enrollment will be done. Second one, universal retention of children up to the age of 14 years of age. And third program is a substantial improvement in the quality of education to enable all children to achieve essential levels of learning. So this was precisely the first three education policies. Now we'll see what are the developments happened. In 2005, new education policy introduced by Manmohan Singh government based upon Common Minimum Program. So Common Minimum Program was introduced in the year 2005. Okay. In 2016 or 2016, new education policy by Narendra Modi government addressing gender discrimination, creation of education tribunals and a common curriculum for science, mathematics and English was introduced. And in 2017, the latest one, with major changes scheduled to be launched by Modi government, that we will be talking about this today. Okay, it was introduced in 2017, but there were a lot of areas for improvement. So updated draft is introduced in 2019. So we'll have a look at that. Before we getting into the details or the facts of new education policy, let us understand few facts. National policy on education is a policy formulated by Government of India to promote education among India's people. The policy covers elementary education to colleges in both rural and urban area. So, elementary education to both rural and urban area, national education policy. Okay. And the first NPE was promulgated in the year 1968. We have just seen 1968 was the first thing. Second one was during Rajiv Gandhi government, that is 1986. Okay. And Government of India appointed a new committee under K. Kasturirangan. So a committee was constituted under K. Kasturirangan in 2017 to prepare a draft for the new national education policy. Now, let's understand what are the recent and new developments in educational sector in India. So recent developments are, first thing we have District Primary Education Program. DPEP is there. Okay. Second one we have SSA or Sarva Shiksha Abhiyan. It provides right to education to all people. Third one is National Program for Education of Girls at Elementary Level. NPEGEL is the program. Okay. Fourth program is Aram Essay or Rashtriya Madhyamik Shiksha Abhiyan for secondary education. It was launched in the year 2009. Fifth program is inclusive education for the disabled at secondary stage. So inclusive, we can see disabled at the secondary stage. Sixth program is Sakshar Bharat. It is to increase the literacy among the people, normally for the adult education. This is to increase literacy in the country, literacy rate in the country. Okay. And the last one is RUSA or Rashtriya Uchchatar Shiksha Abhiyan for development of higher education, which was launched in the year 2030. So these are the 7 new developmental areas which happened in India in educational sector and the policy wise. Now let us understand few points regarding Draft National Education Policy 2019. The first point is that this Committee for Draft National Education Policy was chaired by Dr. K. Kasturirangan. This was constituted in the year 2017 and report was submitted in the year 2019, precisely May 31st, 2019, the report was submitted. Then second one, it is constituted by Ministry of Human Resource Development in the year 2017. And the report proposes an education policy which seeks to address challenges like access to education, equity in education, quality, affordability and accountability faced by current education system. So these are the challenges which is faced. So the current draft policy is to how to recover these challenges and how can we go ahead in the new education sector is what been discussed in the draft. This draft policy provides for reforms at all levels of education from school to higher education. It seeks to increase the focus on early childhood care, reform the current exam system, strengthen teacher training, restructure the education regulatory framework. It also seeks to set up a National Education Commission to increase public investment in education, strengthen the use of technology and increase focus on vocational and adult education. So in this draft national education policy, which was submitted in the year 2019 and which was constituted under K. Kasturirangan in the year 2017, submitted the report with different dimensions of school education, secondary education, higher education, the management and infrastructure facilities. First, we'll see what is told under school education. So under school education, early childhood care and education have to be given. Important change that got in early childhood care and education framework is that this will consist of guidelines for up to 3-year-old children for parents and teachers. So divided in 2 categories, up to 3-year children and education framework for 3 to 8-year-old children. So it is divided into, this is the most important aspect of this education policy. So this will be implemented by improving and expanding the Anganwadi systems and co-locating Anganwadis with the primary schools. So this is a new reform which is introduced. So early childhood care and education up to 3 years and 3 to 8 years is differentiated into 2 categories, giving special frameworks and guidelines for parents and teachers. Second point is Right to Education Act of 2009. Currently, RTE Act provides for free and compulsory education for all the children from the age of 6 to 14 years. So currently it is like 6 to 14 years. The draft policy recommends that extending the ambit of this RTE Act to include early childhood education and secondary school education. That means from 6 to 14 it will extend to 6 to 18. It will be extended to 18 years. That means we are including secondary education also. Another very important fact to be noted is that draft policy recommends that recent amendments to RTE Act on continuous and comprehensive evaluation and no detention policy must be reviewed. So it states that there should be no detention of children till class 8. Instead, schools must ensure that children are achieving age-appropriate learning systems. There is a lot of differentiation which is introduced in curriculum framework, something like divided into 5-3-3-4 design comprising 5-year foundation stage, 3-year preparatory stage, 3-year middle stage and 4-year secondary stage, like that till class 12. Another important change which was introduced regarding school exam reforms, that is, it recommends restructuring the board examination to test only core concepts, skills and higher order capabilities. So it focuses mainly on core concepts. Exam have to be focuses only on core concepts. These broad examinations will be on a range of subjects. Students can choose their subjects and semester when they want to take these board exams. The school final examinations may be replaced by these board examinations. Another important point is regarding school infrastructure. Very important point to be noted because this draft policy recommends that multiple public schools should be brought together to form a school complex. So introduction of a school complex is being recommended. A complex will consist of one secondary school and all the public schools in its neighborhood that offer education from pre-primary till class 8. Next important fact is regarding teachers management. This draft policy recommends that teachers should be deployed with a particular school complex for at least 5 to 7 years. Okay, it's a good measure. Further, teachers will not be allowed to participate in any non-teaching activities such as cooking midday meals or participating in vaccination campaigns during school hours that could affect their teaching capabilities. And the last reform recommended under school education is regulation of schools. That is, regulation of schools from aspects such as policy making, school operations and academic development. It suggests creating an independent state school regulatory authority for each state that will prescribe basic uniform standards for public and private schools. Department of Education of the state will formulate policy and conduct monitoring and supervision. Now let's go ahead and see the second article of the day, that is regarding Indian economy. Groping in the dark on the economy, government's ever-shifting policy stances shows its lack of understanding when it comes to economic challenges. In this particular discussion, we'll try to understand why this is in news, what is the nature of economic growth in India, what are the reasons for this slowdown, how to fix it, or what's the solution suggested by economists across the country, and what's the current status and what's the way forward. First, we'll try to understand why this is in news. This is in news because the July 5th budget was presented originally as the government's vision for the next 10 years. But only 3 months later, government began revising it. The budget and the economic philosophy that had guided for its formulation were both completely rewritten through a string of amendments. Therefore, the budget's provision for collecting more in taxes from the incomes of super rich, Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman then explained were aimed at redistributing wealth to bring about more equitable development. However, the tax rate hikes were rolled back later. Tax rates on corporate profits were reduced instead. Speculation is now rife about similar relief on individual incomes. In effect or in total, the stated policy doctrine of redistributive taxation stands upended, or it is stand still in a matter of weeks. Next, we'll try to understand what is the nature of economic growth in India. The first and the most important factor is that it is a non-inclusive growth. Non-inclusive means 1% of the wealthiest in India increased their share in wealth 60% in the last 5 years, and the richest 10% in India own more than 4 times wealth than the remaining 90%. So this marks prevalence of high inequality in the Indian socio-economic paradigm. So there are also one inequality in wealth distribution. The second factor is jobless growth. Okay, what do you mean by jobless growth? With increasing economic growth, rate of growth of employment has declined, or we can say simply that unemployment level have increased even though with increase in growth. According to NSSO, unemployment in India is highest in 45 years. With rising population and consequently the labor force, India will soon experience demographic disaster rather than a demographic dividend. The third most important nature of economic growth in India is inadequate spending on social infrastructure. What does this inadequate spending on social infra means? So on comparison with similarly placed emerging economies like India, India spends way too low in education and health center. That means expenditure on social sector is comparatively less on education and health sector primarily. India spends 3% on education and 1.5% on health. This low expenditure can be reflected in the observations noted by the UN that India's literacy was 71.1% in 2015, far beyond that of many African countries like Rwanda, Morocco and Congo. And next important feature of nature of economic growth in India is unsustainable development. So what do you mean by unsustainable development? In the process of growth in India, there has been a severe depletion and degradation of environmental resources. At the same time, IPCC, that is Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, reported and warned India that seriousness of climate change and severe adverse impact on the environment and livelihood of masses because of this unsustainable mode of development. So these are the four features with regard to nature of economic growth in India. First thing is non-inclusive growth, that means inequality is more. Jobless growth, that means employment level is more. Inadequate spending on social infra, that means on education and health spending is very less with respect to percent of GDP. And last one is unsustainable development, that means severe depletion and degradation of environment resources happens with the development issues. Next, we'll see what are the reasons for this economic slowdown. So, the slowdown in the Indian economy is partly cyclical and partly structural. So, what do you mean by cyclical and what do you mean by structural economic slowdown? Cyclical means as part of business cycle. Normal, it is very normal. Sometimes it may be short term also. So, as part of business cycle, we are experiencing a slowdown, that is called cyclical slowdown. It is very natural with respect to all emerging economies and also in developed economies it's been observed. Structural means because of certain structural factors like savings, investments, it can be a problem of long-term issue. There can be a crisis or a stagnation. So structural slowdown is much huge disastrous than cyclical slowdown. So two cyclical factors are there, shadow banking stress and weaker global demand. This is with relates to NBFCs, non-banking financial institution crisis have happened and also weaker global demand. And when it comes to structural factors include savings, investment factors, that is the rates of savings and investment in the Indian economy have declined and also exports and total credit have declined. This has led to slowdown among the major industries like automobiles, diamond, textiles industry and several MSME, that is micro, small and medium enterprises are experiencing a continuous decline which has led to the retrenchment of 3.5 lakh workers so far. That means 3.5 lakh workers have been unemployed from these sectors. Agriculture is in crisis today on account of rising cost of inputs and low prices of producers and low public investment in this sector. Apart from it, there is an income stagnation in urban areas. There's a slowdown in consumption. There is a sharp fall in private consumption and as well as public expenditure. And also externally, there are factors like US-China trade war is also dampening India's growth story. So these are the things in structural thing and these are things in cyclical factors. These two are the major reasons for economic slowdown in India now. Next, we'll try to understand how to fix this problem or what is the solution for this economic slowdown. How can we take our economy ahead? The first and the most important factor to be noted is we can improve this slowdown or we can make again India back to the growth trajectory by applying Keynesian approach. So Keynesian approach says that we have to increase public expenditure, thereby this will result in an increase in demand. So increase public expenditure in investing in agriculture, in infra, inputs, extension marketing, storage, training and in providing profitable prices to farmers. So we should also raise funds for Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act to push up demand. We can also do investments in SHE, that is skill, education and health. So investment can be increased in SHE sector, that is skill, education and health. So increasing additional jobs for ensuring basic health and good quality education up to the secondary level to all so that the meaningful skill formation is possible should be another aim. So it should raise public employment by filling it vacant sanction posts in central and state governments. Government should also focus on promoting labor intensive sectors. So what is labor intensive sector? Labor intensive. Labor intensive means where employment rate will increase. That means people employed number will increase. So that is what is called labor intensive. For example, manufacturing is a labor intensive sector. But whereas service is not a labor intensive sector. That means manufacturing gives employment opportunities to more people. So it is called labor intensive sector. So to fix this problem, another point is that we have to introduce labor intensive opportunities across India. And we have just discussed about cyclical issues. So basically, cyclical slowdown can be dealt with counter-cyclical policy response. I've told you there is a business cycle like this. Okay, if we are in slowdown now or decline, so we have some counter-cyclical measures to come out of this. So counter-cyclical policy means encouraging spending during downturns and tightening credit during inflationary periods. Second thing is that basically Indian economy has huge potential. Current slowdown must be dealt with a bottom-up strategy, which may include boosting agriculture, food processing, tourism, MSME, automobiles and pharmaceuticals. And there is also a critics that is spread in the industry. That is, government believes it will succeed in reversing the economic slowdown. That was the point of discussion in our article today, using an approach that had worked for it in consolidating political power. It is working on the assumption that phenomenon of the personality cult can be replicated when it comes to economy. This is a mistake. Even in a highly imperfect market economy like India, government is merely another significant player. This is what the critics have pointed out in the policy of reversing the economic slowdown. Now we'll go ahead and see our next article, that is regarding BRICS, 5 in 1. BRICS countries need greater connectivity and more intergrouping trade to get ahead. In this respective discussion, we'll go ahead and see why this is in news. We'll have a quick reference towards BRICS, NDB, that is New Development Bank, BRICS Business Council, what's the current status and what can we do to take this ahead. So first we'll see why this is in news. This is in news because leaders of BRICS, that is Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa, on Thursday opened the 11th BRICS summit where deliberations took place on key areas such as trade, investment and counter-terrorism. India have raised issues of terrorism at the 11th BRICS summit and said the menace has resulted in the loss of almost $1 trillion to the world economy. Addressing the BRICS plenary session at the iconic Itamaraty Palace in the presence of presidents of Brazil, China, Russia and South Africa, PM Modi said that terrorism is the biggest threat to development, peace and prosperity. Now we'll try to understand what is BRICS or what is this BRICS organization stand for. BRICS is an acronym coined for an association of 5 major emerging national economies, that is Brazil, Russia, India, China and South Africa. Originally, the first 4 were grouped as BRIC. The first 4 was BRIC. South Africa was not a member. Before the induction of South Africa in 2010, that is BRICS members were known for their significant influence on regional affairs and all are members of G20. All these members are participants of G20. BRICS actually does not exist in the form of organization, but it is an annual summit between supreme leaders of 5 nations. So almost in the form of annual summits. It does not have a structure of an organization. The chairmanship of forum is rotated annually among the members in accordance with this acronym. So BRICS chairmanship is rotated like this. BRICS cooperation in the past decade has expanded to include an annual program of over 100 sectoral meetings. In this world map, we can locate BRICS countries in this graphical representation. First one is B, that goes for Brazil. So it is BRICS. B goes for Brazil. R goes for Russia. Okay. I goes for India, C for China and S for South Africa. So these are the 5 BRICS nations and their locations in the world map. Next we'll have a quick reference towards NDB or New Development Bank. What is this New Development Bank? New Development Bank is headquartered in Shanghai, which is in China. Headquartered is there in Shanghai, that is in China. Basically, setting up of a new development bank was considered to mobilize resources for the infrastructure and sustainable development projects in BRICS and other emerging economies as well as in developing countries. This was decided in 2012 in New Delhi at the summit, that is BRICS summit. So normally they give resource mobilization to BRICS countries as well as developing and emerging economies. It is not restricted to BRICS only. In 2014, during the 6th BRICS Summit in Fort Laser, leaders signed the agreement establishing New Development Bank. So, New Development Bank came into existence in 2014. NDB's key areas of operations are clean energy, transport infrastructure, irrigation, sustainable urban development and economic cooperation among the member states. NDB functions as a consultative mechanism among the BRICS members with all the members countries possessing equal rights. Next, we'll have a quick reference towards BBC or BRICS Business Council. So, BRICS Business Council was established during the 5th BRICS Summit held in 2013. This was held in South Africa, that is Durban in South Africa. Mainly the objective of creating a council like this is to constitute a platform which will promote and strengthen businesses, trade and investment ties among the business communities of 5 BRICS countries. Also to ensure that there is a regular dialogue between business communities of BRICS nations and governments of the BRICS countries. Identify problems and bottlenecks to ensure greater economic, trade and investment ties among the BRICS countries and recommend solutions accordingly. Even though the idea behind BRICS have been dimmed by sluggish growth in Brazil and South Africa, Russia's sanction-laden slowdown, group has adapted to the times and proven its resistance. As a result, even at a time when the 5 countries are heading in different directions politically, we all know that these 5 countries normally have different ideology-based institutions in the political head. So they move heading to different directions. Even though that exist, they found ways to build a common vision for the world's economic future with an emphasis on multilateralism and a joint statement at the Brasilia that decried unilateral and protectionist actions. For India in particular, articulation of this vision comes at an important time given that it faces its own economic crisis and troubled trading ties with several nations. Failure of officials to resolve issues in time to join RCEP, that is Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, has raised questions about whether India is reversing its market liberalization and openness to trade. So it is significant that Mr. Modi and Chinese President used this BRICS platform for continued talks on bringing back India into this RCEP fold and focused on resolving their trade issues through recently launched mechanisms led by finance ministers. Basically, BRICS countries now acknowledge the weakening of global economic slowdown in the statement, repeated their commitment to WTO, though the original promoter of the unilateral structure, US, is retrenching its interest in the body. They also presented a vision for rules-based, transparent, non-discriminatory, open, free and inclusive international trade. At the same time, the summit also commended BRICS-led New Development Bank, BRICS Business Council or BBC in ensuring that BRICS countries, major drivers of growth in the past decade, continue to represent close to a third of global output. Where BRICS have failed its founders is in the vision of interdependence between the 5 countries. Despite their combined population accounting to 40% of humanity, intra-BRICS trade still makes up just 15% of world trade. So even though there is 40% of people across the countries in the BRICS country, the inter-country trade is only limited to 15% of world trade. So what can we see ahead? When we are going forward, it is greater connectivity and more trade that will allow the BRICS countries to claim their rightful space and provide leadership and energy that the global economic order needs urgently now. That's all for today. Hope this helps. Thank you.